You read the thumbnail correctly, ladies and gentlemen. There is no such thing as a diminished seventh in jazz. That is the note and the chord. It does not exist. And I'm going to show you why in this video. Let's do it. Let's look at this naming scheme that we have in jazz, specifically with a 6 chord. Here we have a C major 6, C, E, G, A. A C minor 6, we just lower the third, giving us our C, E flat, G, A. A diminished sixth would quite simply be a C, E flat, our diminished note, G flat, A. There is our diminished sixth. Not to be confused with Barry Harris's sixth diminished concept. This naming scheme more accurately outlines what this chord is. One of the unspoken rules in jazz that we have is that you cannot have more than one kind of third in a chord. Now let me explain what that means, because you will see in jazz notation, for example, a C7 sharp 9 chord. Enharmonics in jazz are notated to make stuff easier to read. In classical music, enharmonic notation is very, very specific to how a chord or how a note will function. But in jazz, it's more of a convenience thing in terms of being easy to read by the person who has to play it. So with the C7 sharp 9 chord, we quite literally have a major third and a sharp 9. We do not have 2/3 in this chord. You can't. The triad is either going to be major or minor as far as the third goes. It cannot be both. Thirds and sevenths are very interrelated, which brings me to the next point. Something else that you've been told, but you probably didn't really understand, and that is thirds and sevenths are the most important notes in the chord. This is wrong. More accurately put, this is not explained enough so that people understand what we mean when we say thirds and sevenths are the most important notes of the chord. Now, the notes of the chord that define its quality are the third, the seventh, and the fifth. These are the notes that define the quality of the chord. Quality being major, minor, augmented, diminished, or dominant. I know suspended is also there, but we're not going to deal with that one because the suspended doesn't have a third. So don't worry about suspended. For the same reason that you cannot have 2/3 in a chord because it's ambiguous, you cannot have 2/7. If we take a look at what we have normally been calling a diminished seventh, we realize that when we spell out the scale, we wind up with 2/7. This is a no-no. In jazz, you can have more than 1/9, and you can have more than 1/5. We often do this when we are notating chords in jazz. Let's take a look now at the two diminished scales that would be associated with a C diminished chord. One leads with a half step, and the other leads with a whole step. Let's start with the scale that leads with a half step. I'm going to enharmonically write this to more accurately reflect what we call this. But how we note this in written music will ultimately be what is best or easiest for the player to read. So we have C, D flat, D sharp, E, F sharp, G, A, B flat, C. As you can see, we have a flat 9 and a sharp 9 here. We have a sharp 11, and then we have the flat 7. Let's take a look at this scale when we lead with a whole step. So we have C, D, E flat, F, G flat, G sharp, A, B natural this time, C. So you notice with both of these scales, you only have 1/7. This is the rule. For the same reason that we do not have a diminished third, which would just be a ninth, we cannot actually have a diminished seventh. Now, I want to come back to something that I said about thirds and sevenths being the most important notes of the chord, and how I said this is not entirely true. What it really means is that the thirds, sevenths, and fifths together help to define the quality of the chord. And you mostly need thirds and sevenths in order to do that. The fifth by itself does absolutely nothing to define the quality of the chord. The note in any alteration is ambiguous, even in its natural form. A perfect fifth or a natural five can be major, can be minor, it can be dominant. A C flat five can be major, it can be dominant. The flat five can even be minor. In this case, we'd have a C minor 7 flat 5. It's much more closely related to a minor chord than it is a diminished anything, because normally we would call that chord a C half diminished. Which brings me to this point, there's also no such thing as a half diminished chord. Let's use the same naming scheme that we did for the 6th chord, but now let's apply that to a 7th chord. So here we have a C major 7. We lower the 3rd, we have a C minor major 7. We lower the 5th, we have a C diminished major 7. The 7th is very clear. It's major. This is also the chord that is associated with playing a diminished scale leading with a whole step. Let's figure out what we would call a half diminished chord. So here we have a C major 7 to a C dominant 7 to a C minor 7 to a C diminished 7th. Personally, I like to use the naming scheme that we have with the C diminished major 7. By lowering the 7th a half step, we now have a C diminished minor 7. This is most closely to what we call this chord in jazz, which is a C minor 7 flat 5. If you like this kind of content and you want to support the channel, you can buy me a delicious piece of cake. It's like Patreon or Kickstarter, one of these kind of things, one of these donation type of things. And I appreciate those of you who have done that. Thank you a lot. I have a degree in jazz studies, ladies and gentlemen, so throughout my career, I've been asked not just a lot of questions, but a lot of the same questions, and not just me. So if so many people are asking a lot of the same questions, why aren't we, the American Jazz Collegiate Union of Jazz Players, coming up with different answers and solutions to what are essentially the same questions or the same problems? So I've been taking it upon myself to just go through some of these things. Like I talked about the blues scale as a type of suspension, and with this, talking about there is no such thing as a diminished 7th, is my attempt at really facilitating your understanding of jazz and just making it a lot more easy to understand these core concepts. I like to think of it as a type of metric system for jazz. And yeah, in America, we hate the metric system, but not really. We do use it a lot more than what foreign people think we use it. But in short, the metric system in the proper applications is just far, far simpler. Like the idea of a Dorian major 7, blues as a suspension, and there's no such thing as a diminished 7th. It's really just a diminished 6th chord. This fits very nicely with the theory as I have described in this video. So obviously, ladies and gentlemen, I do have some merchandise available, and I do also have my Altissimo books for alto and tenor, and I have my Diminished book. My digital stuff has moved over to PayHip, which is all my lesson books are only sold digitally, and I've moved all of that over to PayHip. This kind of stuff, the merchandise, physical stuff, is still on Teespring, and I do have some stuff on Amazon. I will post a link. I do have an affiliate link with Woodwind Brasswind, where you can pick up one of these saxophones. They have some really nice back-to-school specials going on right now, so make sure you take advantage of that while it lasts. They're always running some kind of special, but be sure to check that out. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's all I got for you. See ya!